Central and Eastern Europe lack a lot of long-haul carriers. Even just looking at airlines with wide bodies, there's only a few countries with the capability of long intercontinental flights. East of Germany, it's pretty much just Austria, Romania, Serbia, and Poland. Today we're in Poland's capital as we fly their flag carrier, LOT Polish Airlines, on one of their flagship routes from Warsaw to Chicago, which was one of the first sister city agreements in the world in 1960. And now that Czech Airlines has folded, LOT is the 12th oldest airline in the world, as the airline is quickly approaching 100 years in operation. They become the 18th largest carrier in Europe, much higher if we look only at long-haul airlines. And in this video, we'll explore their long-haul business class, discuss their history, and their potential plans for the future. So use the timestamps below to find what you're looking for, and since Polish pronunciations may as well be in hieroglyphics, we're going to try to avoid them as much as possible to avoid getting shafted too hard in the comments. Let's go! After arriving from Prague earlier this morning, it was just before noon as we arrived curbside at the North Hall, which was formerly Terminal 2. Just over 15 years old, it houses most Star Alliance and One World carriers, and the far end is dedicated to the hometown carrier. The terminal was renovated in 2008, and LOT has rows for each cabin class. Warsaw's airport also has Gold Track, which is a priority given to Star Alliance Gold customers. Some places include priority immigration, although most are just priority security, and in places like Addis Ababa, Cairo, and here. I also appreciate the LOT branding around the terminal. The entrance has not only the logo on the walls, but also on the door. Inside, there's all sorts of LOT content from logos to places to take a picture with, but the most picturesque part was the business class check-in counters. In a semi-enclosed aisle, they've got the same LOT counters, but with no lines, in a carpeted area with LOT 787 model, brief airline info, and cozy seats for a break in the journey. It also dumps you out right at the fast-track security. Into the terminal, where there's one hallway with the restaurants and a parallel one with the gates. And even though we have the lounge, that Johnny Rockets was tempting. Haven't had that in years. Upstairs, there is a LOT lounge for passengers flying to a Schengen destination, so they urged us to go to the International Lounge. Back downstairs and right outside the lounge and security checkpoint is the passport checks for outbound passengers. One of those times you really wish you had an EU passport. With passport stamped, there was also a check for passengers going to the US. Most airports have document checks for people going to the US, and this was just that. Proof of citizenship, or visa, then they stamped your boarding pass and you were allowed to board. Interestingly enough, the lounge for this wing of flights is downstairs. There's a pay-to-use lounge right next door, but the LOT lounge is otherwise for LOT and Star Alliance partners. LOT sees about 30 destinations outside the Schengen area from Warsaw, of which the business class and status members would use this lounge, so you'd expect a fairly large space with plenty amenities, right? That is not the case. What you see here is basically the whole space. I was here early, but the closer we got to departure, the busier it got, to the point where they literally ran out of seats, and people were leaning against the walls in the back. The first part of the lounge is the bar. There's other drinks elsewhere, but this is where you can self-serve your alcoholic drinks. It also might be the first lounge I've seen with shot glasses, so party at the LOT lounge. There's a counter along with window with chargers and high stools. This is where I ended up sitting, and it gave great views of this one gate, but not much else. The buffet is across from the bar and has an island in the middle with all the food, one side with main course and hot options, and the other side with dessert and snacks. But if you want something to drink without alcohol, there's a whole counter with fridges with water, soft drinks, coffee, yogurt drinks, etc. The rest of the lounge is seating, albeit limited. There's the central area with seating in groups of 2 and planters to help provide some extra privacy. There's also an enclave next to the side with a few more seats and LOT-themed posters. Then the last section is with more of the same seats with tables in the middle. Then is the back hallway to the restrooms and shower, and one single, strangely placed work booth. The shower was free, but there's only one, so try to get it early before it's booked up until boarding. The main issue I have with this lounge is the size. In the next 3 hours, there's just shy of 200 business class seats departing. Granted, not everyone goes to the lounge, and flights may not all be full. But if we assume that about 3/4 of the people visiting the lounge, even for a short visit, that's 150 people, and I only counted about 70 seats and one single toilet and urinal in the restroom. If they really want to keep growing, this is something they're going to have to change. Just prior to boarding, I went back up to the gates to where I hoped to get a shot of our aircraft, but this was all we could see. The next door gate to Delhi was a similar story. LOT's boarding also had to be one of the most chaotic boarding processes I've ever experienced. First off, there wasn't any signage on where to queue, and after a little while, there was a swarm of people in a clump so large it blocked the entire walkway of the terminal. They put a sign up for business class passengers to line up, but then moved it to another spot, so I went from one of the first few to one of the last few in line. Boarding time then came and went, and they announced it would be pushed back 15 minutes, then another 5, then another 5, and then nothing. That did give us time to watch the many LOT aircraft outside with the logo that has become famous over the years. LOT actually hosted a logo design contest in 1931, early on in their history, and this was the one that won with the flying crane designed by a Polish artist. Simple, yet timeless. In the 70s, they updated their livery to the same paint scheme they maintain to this day. Finally, 45 minutes behind schedule, we boarded and I had to fight through the all-economy passengers who cluttered the boarding entrance. And you can't just assume who's in business and economy, so I ended up asking about 20 people so I could sort out who to cut in front of. After the stress of that whole process, welcome on board LOT's 787-9 business class. In a 222 setup, it's actually a setup that was fairly common in the 787-8s, but much less common in the newer aircraft as it's far from the premium standard. I will say, however, that I love the look of the seat and headrest itself, although it seems like that may be a bit of a hot take. But if they do eventually upgrade these cabins, I hope they find a way to maintain this super unique look. The headrest is adjustable, rising and curling, and the seat is hard, but it's wide, as these 222 setups do have that benefit at least. Between the seats is reading lights and an armrest, which is hiding things underneath it, which can be accessed with this button here, also adding privacy to the seat. Under is all the plugs, remote, and cup holder. It looks like storage, but when you recline the seat, there's a 100% chance that your items will fall underneath it. The seat controls are in front of that with the counter as well, which is meant to be shared, which my seatmate struggled to understand. The tray table pulls out from the side, nice size, and it swivels so you can get out if you need. The divider also has a little literature slot and storage on the front, although everything seemed to fall out of it. In front of you is not only the seatback TV, but lots of storage. From these little cubbies between each TV down to the footrest with separated compartments below it, and the literature pocket adjacent. Plus, we've got 3 whole windows despite no overhead air vents, which sucks because of how hot the airport was for some reason. Amenities included the water that was waiting for us, and then I opted for the sparkling wine over the water and juice. They also provided an amuse-bouche that I couldn't quite identify. There was LOT branded slippers waiting for us as well, along with the amenity kit made out of one of the nicer materials out there. It included nothing too extraordinary. The lotions were mostly empty, but the socks were much higher quality than most airlines supply, more like normal socks. We got 3-part bedding with an incredibly plush and large pillow to accompany a blanket that was much more insulated on the outside than the inside. And then a mattress pad that I really do appreciate, even if it was like putting a paper towel on the seat with how thin it is. LOT has had crazy financial gains since their COVID recovery. 2022 was strong, but 2023 was their best year ever, making a record $276 million profit at a roughly 10% profit margin, being beaten only by Turkish, Swiss, and Iberia in Europe. So the question is, what do they do with this newfound money? You'd have to hope it goes to the passenger experience and route growth from our perspective. The lounge could obviously use a ton of work, and the cabin is reminiscent of the 787's beginnings, not the 2019 area that it actually comes from. In addition to that, what about potential destinations? Focusing on the long haul, which is the most interesting, LOT will probably need the fleet for it, as they need currently their 14 787s at full capacity, so it'll be tough unless they trim down somewhere else. There's always leasing, which they have done with Air Belgium's A330s, but barring that, it'll probably require an aircraft order to expand much more. And while LOT has been looking to refresh their medium-haul fleet, there's not much with the long-haul stuff. So what if they did do that? Best guess is they'd reach cities with the highest Polish diasporas or Star Alliance hubs. Well, the USA has the most Polish, with 3 times more than Germany in second place, with over 80% of them surrounding the Great Lakes regions. New York, New Jersey, and Illinois are top 3 and sufficiently spoken for. Other than that, California is the next state, but then is the much smaller diasporas in Canada and Mexico, plus Buenos Aires if we want to round out the Western Hemisphere. Leaving San Francisco, Vancouver, Houston, Buenos Aires, and Rio de Janeiro as the top candidates based on that metric alone that currently have no Polish-bound flights. There's also currently 14 Star Alliance hubs that don't see LOT services at the moment, with the top few being San Francisco, Montreal, Vancouver, and Houston. So there's definitely some overlap there. LOT also benefits by its location. Central and Eastern European carriers can't typically reach the Americas, so LOT's been known to represent them, with flights out of Budapest and Lithuania as a 9th Freedom flight or something. I'd love to see them utilize this power with more services on top of unserved routes like Budapest to New York. Really, it's anyone's guess, but barring new aircraft, we are a ways away from LOT finding many new long-haul destinations. LOT's entertainment was split up into normal categories, with movies having a good separation of genres, even though most titles showed up in multiple categories, and Barbie was listed as an all-time classic. TV shows do that thing I hate where every episode shows separately, cluttering the screen, but you can add things to favorites, which is nice. The map's fully interactive, although the remote is best since the screen is so far, and the remote was considerably laggy and frustrating. Another interesting thing about LOT is they just recently announced that they will begin adding Wi-Fi to their aircraft, but an older style, the thing that United and Delta have been using. So while other airplanes are upgrading their Wi-Fi to this new fast free service, LOT is just catching up with where they are now. They passed out menus and then took our orders shortly before departure. The meal structure was a bit odd timing-wise, as we basically were getting 2 dinners, as we took off at about 5 p.m. and arrived at about 9 p.m. You can see the options where we got our choice of starter and main course for the first meal, which was much more formal, and then the pre-arrival meal, which was just the one choice, oddly enough. They did offer some mid-flight snacks as well, on top of the 11 wine choices from around the world. The meal service was prefaced with hot towels, and then the tablecloths with LOT logo in the corner. Then, unsalted nuts and a choice of beverage, of which I started with a Coke before the appetizers were brought out. The choice of soup or salad was given, and I got the salad, with beets, fennel, quinoa, goat cheese, and creme fraiche, next to a seasonal salad as well. For the main course, once that was collected, I opted for the duck choice, something that I've pretty much found on all airlines in this region, oddly enough. This one was roasted duck, with beets, caramelized apple, and potato dumplings, kind of a strange food grouping in my opinion. I also chased this down with a Polish beer. Lastly, the dessert cart came through with about 8 choices to wrap up the meal, and I chose the passion fruit cake over the many other cakes or cheeses. The seat does go fully flat to meet the ottoman, and with the privacy partition raised, you can see that your upper body is fairly protected and private. Making the bed, you can see how much space the large pillow takes up, and then the mattress pad, which probably should have been put on first as it hooks around the headrest to lock in place. And lastly, the blanket, which has the LOT logo on it as well. Honestly, for all the hate these 222 setups get, and deservedly so in this day and age, they have one major thing going for them. they have considerably more space for sleep. Since they aren't wedging in extra counters and staggering seats, you have ample room for your feet, left, right, and up, down, and your torso. As you can see here, there's like another foot between me and the armrest. Lastly, the privacy in bed mode. It's not as perfect as a 1-2-1 setup, but with the divider up in a window seat, people can't really see you, and you're definitely blocked from your seatmate. When I woke up, we had just reached the North American coast. I set an alarm so I didn't sleep too much since I had to go to sleep on arrival. If you're snacky mid-flight, the forward galley has a whole cart of stuff, and I chose one of the snacks and the turkey and tomato sandwich, along with a green tea that one of the flight attendants brought over. As we watched the sunset in the distance, we basically kept up with it for most of the flight. And one of the 222 setup's biggest critiques is the person between you and the lavatory. Something you typically don't stress over at this price point on most carriers, but in this setup you have a nice groin stretch trying to get past them without waking them up if they're fully reclined. The lavatories aren't any bigger in business class it seems, but the fake wood floors were a nice touch. Plus the amenities offered in here with a lotion, soap, and refreshing mist. Just under 90 minutes from landing, the accent lights were raised as we prepared for landing and the pre-arrival meal. As mentioned, this meal only had the one choice for food, but they also only gave us one choice for beverage, bringing around a tray of orange juice for everyone. Then the one tray was given to us, including pasta with tomato salsa, mushrooms, and spinach, along with Cajun chicken with roasted pumpkin, mustard dressing, and pecans, next to the salad with broccoli, breaded groats, chickpeas, and harissa dressing, rounded off with a fruit salad. Not the best meal in the world, but I'm only an hour from a Chicago dog, so I'm chillin'. And then, during our descent, we were given a chocolate-covered dried plum as a final treat. As an airline quickly approaching its centennial, there's definitely a history to them. LOT first flew as a domestic carrier out of Warsaw, growing in its first few years in the 1930s. It wasn't until 1931, however, when their first international route took off connecting Warsaw and Bucharest, and then more Central European destinations after initial success. Initially, they wanted Polish aircraft in the fleet, but all they got was a single-engine prop plane that held 4 people, so they remained with Douglas and Lockheed. In 1934, the current Warsaw airport opened and LOT received their new head offices and airport facilities, but also allowed for greater expansion, as a previous airport was in a park in the city and had to be closed as it was being swallowed by the growing urban areas. Since inception, LOT has had goals of U.S. flights due to the large Polish diasporas. So they ran a test flight in 1938 from Los Angeles to Buenos Aires, to Natal, Brazil, to Dakar, Senegal, and back to Warsaw to judge the feasibility of long-haul services, although it would be a while until any of those places saw LOT flights. They also planned London and Moscow services, but this was right when World War II kicked off. As a matter of fact, during German occupation, most of LOT's aircraft and employees were evacuated to Romania. Even after the Soviet occupation of Poland after World War II, the Polish Air Force took care of most of the country's transport needs. It wasn't until 1945 that the government relaunched LOT, 6 years after initial suspension. They were, however, forced to operate mostly Soviet aircraft due to the Cold War tensions and their involvement in the Warsaw Pact. With old Soviet aircraft after Stalinism left Poland, they were able to acquire a handful of Western aircraft. But these few aircraft would be the only ones they saw until the 90s, as they were pushed back towards Ilyushin and Tupolev jets and turboprops. The 60s and 70s brought a focus on the Middle East and Northern Africa, as Western Europe was tougher for them to expand into, but once the Ilyushin 62 arrived, they just flew past Europe, as it was their first long-haul jet and enabled their first trans-Pacific routes, with service to New York starting in 1973. 1981, however, brought more restrictions to Poland, with communist crackdowns on trade disputes nearly shutting down all commercial flights, with all LOT connections suspended along with many Western carriers, as well until flights resumed 3 years later to Chicago and New York. The fall of the communist system in 1989 brought Poland and the airline aircraft immediately, with 767s, 757s, and ATRs, with 737s later, replacing the Soviet fleet, leading to the world's youngest fleet award shortly after. They were actually one of the first Central European airlines with American-built aircraft, as so many of them used Soviet aircraft. In the 90s, they also added Polish cities as bases to allow greater travel from cities besides Warsaw. The 90s ended with a partnership with American Airlines allowing for more connections on both ends of the journey, and Eurolot, which was supposed to be their domestic carrier to help turn Warsaw into a transfer hub. Then they welcomed the new millennium with their largest aircraft delivery in their history, and became the 14th member of the Star Alliance, as LOT was really becoming a world player in the 10 years since the new government. Maybe too big of a player though, because they were forced to redesign the Warsaw airport in 2006 to allow for more space for LOT. The 2010s saw an Asian focus as they were given Siberian airspace rights in 2011, and used it to launch flights from Europe, connecting in Warsaw and on to East Asia, which is exactly what Finnair was doing just to the north. They even pulled the US flights from Krakow to open more aircraft up for Asia, and acquired 787s with the first lie-flat business class, and efficiency and range for their new goals. Not to mention, they were the first European carrier to get the 787. They actually tried to sell a majority share at this time to Turkish Airlines to launch the growth, but it was blocked as Turkish wasn't an EU carrier, so LOT was forced to restructure themselves to profit, and they did. And although their acquisition of Condor fell through, LOT had a very smooth COVID recovery, being largely profitable since 2021. 2023 was the best year in their history, with the 4th largest profit margins in Europe, as they're rising the ranks in Europe, meaning the flag carrier of Poland is stronger than ever as it approaches its 100th anniversary in just a few years. LOT is in a purgatory of sorts in my rankings. I do think they serve a vital and superfluous market in Central and Eastern Europe, which lacks diverse long-haul services, and it's obvious they found success being around for almost 100 years and still rising profit margins. So the question is, where's that money going? Because it's obviously not being invested into the cabin. The 222 cabin seen in the business class was one of the few standard options when the 787 first came out. First seen on the 787-8 of many carriers. Kenya Airways, Ethiopian Airlines, a handful of Asian carriers, even United had a weird 222 setup on the first 787s. But they've since updated them to match the other updated Polaris cabins. One thing stands out, however. Almost every carrier redesigned their cabin for the 787-9. As it's newer, it sees longer flights, more premium destinations, and higher densities. This is why we see things like Ethiopian, with a 222 on the 787-8, but a 121 on the 787-9. Same with a number of carriers. Just seems like LOT got lazy and slapped this outdated product in their 787s fleet-wide. Other than that, when it comes to the airport product, I feel that the lounge could use some attention. I mean, just looking at other Star Alliance carriers in Europe, Lufthansa, Austrian, and Swiss have incredible and huge spaces, with multiple lounge locations in their hubs despite being a smaller size. Except Lufthansa, which is over double the size. The amenities are nice in the lounge, but they just need more space, like 3 times more space, and maybe views that aren't of baggage handlers the whole time. Granted, with plans to open a new airport for Warsaw, they might be trying to stretch the life of this lounge until then, so like 10 years. Good luck with that. Back to onboard, other than the seats, the soft product was exactly average. The crew was nice, they did their job, but nothing else really. Just safe and efficient, but in the background. The food was acceptable. I found the taste to be great, even if the presentation looked a bit rushed, but a good selection, for dinner at least. The second meal, only having the one option, was a bit odd and unfortunate. The main thing going forward is going to be how these profits get reinvested. All major European carriers are overhauling the onboard product. New cabins at Swiss, Lufthansa, British, and Air France. Free and fast Wi-Fi at a growing number of carriers. Menus partnering with local renowned chefs with TAP Portugal, Air France, and SAS. But LOT is missing from all those lists. They still have the outdated cabin. They are just adding Wi-Fi, but the older, expensive, and slow kind. They're headed towards the Tempest that can be easily avoided with a bit of reinvestment of those profits. They've finally got the means to do it seems, so I'm excited and hopeful that we hear developments on this front in the near future. But until that point, Safe travels. I'll see y'all next time.